not necessarily allied with, I use that in the loose sense, not a formal alliance, versus Korea and Japan is a tough question. I think that you are probably both more likely to be effective and, in a sense, maybe more, how would I put this? Well, let me just say, you're more likely to be effective if you work with the countries that you have not only long-standing relations with, but values. And I think that part of the reason you have those long-standing relations are because you share certain values. And those values often translate into policy. If you assume that that's not important and you can simply open up sets of equally deep and comprehensive political relations with countries with which you don't share values, or countries which, as I would argue India is, still ambivalent about its global role, then I think you will be stuck at the aspirational stage. And while it's fine to pursue that, I don't think that you should do that to the detriment of those value-based formal commitment relationships, and in fact should attempt to leverage those into a way that brings the other countries into that that set of discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Mike McDevitt from CNA. Misha, that was an excellent presentation. A couple of questions and an observation, I guess. I share your view that Koizumi, as it turns out, was an aberration and had a lot of people persuaded that Japan was on a different trajectory, and in fact, that has turned out to be a mirage. But I thought I understood you to suggest that maybe Lee was the same, and I would argue he is not the one who set South Korea on a path toward being a global player. There's a long, well, maybe not so long, but his predecessors have also been talking about that. In fact, I remember being struck very much in 2006 by a presentation by the South Korean defense minister at Shangri-La saying, we're a global player. You know, we want to be a responsible stakeholder. And he was out and about talking about South Korea being out and about in the world. So I think Lee has taken that theme that was running through South Korean politics and pushed it to perhaps a new level. But in that sense, he's less likely to be an aberration than Koizumi, I would argue. Taking trilateralism to a new level, certainly your analysis of why Washington has been cautious about that, but I think it also, the same arguments about worrying about China also make Seoul and Tokyo cautious about taking trilateralism to a new level. So the only way it will move to a new level, I would argue, is if China scares the hell out of them. And when that happens, or if that happens, then there'll be a lot more political willingness in the capitals of our two allies to maybe move beyond this haphazard trilateral approach. And finally, if it does move that way, one of the great impediments Japan has to overcome, I think, is the constitutional interpretation against coalition. So that also is a big roadblock, I would argue, for Tokyo.
Yeah, Mike, thank you. I mean, I agree. Your point on Korea, I think, is very good, and I didn't mean to imply that President Lee will be an aberration. I mean, we don't know, because of course someone can turn it around, and you might have then said, well, okay, you had sort of Roh Moo-hyun, and then President Lee were moving towards getting Korea more involved, and that got stopped. I mean, that's just policies. Those can always change. But you're right. For all of the as is said here at KI all the time when there are meetings, for all of the tensions in the U.S.-Korean relationship under the past administration in Korea, the two worked far more closely globally, and those were the early years of the war, than you would have expected reading headlines or hearing rhetoric coming out. So I think that's right, and that does get, again, to the issue of never being able to separate what state interests are from broader global rhetorical issues, and not to be deceived by that. The trilateralism, I mean, that's a good point. Do you want to just pursue trilateralism for its own sake? Is that a good idea? I think it's, I see it more as well, I would hope as a way to provide a vision, which I happen to think is the right vision for not only our relations, but the broader region, which is a more liberal region. It's to push, or if not to push, at least to support liberal movements, freer societies, freer trade, and the like, and not just among these three, of course, but to bring in other countries such as Taiwan and as Mongolia, which is another country that has really sought to punch above its weight and has done some enormously beneficial things over the past years. So I think there is absent the fear factor. Can you just simply place it as a good in and of itself that should try to help guide some of our policies? And potentially then come up with new initiatives? I'd argue yes. On the other hand, you're absolutely right. If the countries in the region are scared of any one actor or any set of actors, will the response be bandwagoning or balancing? So far, I think because of the structures we've put in place, you're more likely, obviously among those who are tied into us, to have balancing. Those who are free floaters, free agents, some of the ASEAN countries and the like, they're the ones who have a really tough choice to make. And you look at Vietnam swinging back and forth, for example. I think on the balance, moving towards balancing, but it attempts to move closer to Korea. Obviously, they still have economic relations and visits, and they have a fraternal, communist ideology that they share together every time the heads of state come together. So are you more willing then, as an Asian nation, to move towards trilateralism if you're scared? Yes. On the other hand, I'm not sure that's a great outcome. I don't think we want, people to be scared, and if they're scared for good reason, meaning there's tensions and problems, that in itself is...
How did NATO get started? Everybody was scared.
Exactly. That's probably not a world we want to live in. So, but it may be the world that we find most effective for dealing with that. So I think your points are right, and it'll be that tension between a sort of positive view of why you would try to link up some of the more liberal countries in the region together, if that's what you wanted to do, versus we're doing it because we got a problem over here, and I don't think we're going to resolve that anytime soon.
Thank you. Gordon?
Gordon Flake with the Mansfield Foundation. Misha, thanks for your remarks, and I would very much agree with Admiral McDevitt about the continuity of Korea's global aspirations. Lee Myung-bak really, carried on so many of the initiatives of all of his predecessors. I'm not sure the same thing applies to Korea's commitment to trilateralism, however. You saw, and you kind of laid out in your remarks, kind of blame for the United States for failing to carry on the TCOG and other trilateral movements, but the real impetus for that was in South Korea. The Nomihan administration was, due to a lot of the historical legacy issues with Japan, was deeply hostile to trilateral type meetings and cut them off and didn't participate. And so that's looking back. Looking forward, if you start thinking longer term in terms of the trilateral relationship you're advocating, which I agree with, one of the real challenges is going to be eventual unification. And the introduction of 20 million North Koreans who are completely unreconstructed, right, who are deeply anti-Japanese. And if you notice, the anti-Japanese part of the Nomihan administration was, ironically, these progressives, but also who focused very much on a very nationalistic, ethnocentric kind of nationality-based approach to things. And a lot of that was defined against Japan. So I would just point out that there are some real challenges to trilateralism, both in the future and in the recent past, that aren't just tied to globalization and commitment to a global leadership role.
Yeah, Gordon, thank you. I think that's absolutely right. What I was hearing when I was visiting Korea during the Nomihan administration was more from the working level folks, which is also what you hear in Japan, to be quite honest. The bureaucrats, military officers, not everyone, obviously. We can go over that history as well, but a lot of people who were very committed to that working relationship because it served their interests and they understood that it was a good. You put politics into the mix as you do anywhere, and things get knocked off the rail every time. In Japan, there's a movement by a local assembly to reassert its authority over disputed territories or areas. That knocks relations back down as well. So the issue of reunification, by the way, is I just think it's huge. I remain stunned personally at the lack of any